radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. If you're just tuning in for the first time, this is a program dedicated to calling out and correcting gently bias that you will find in much of the mainstream media here in Idaho. Now, this is not in any way supposed to make you more enemy-driven or to make you angry, although I'll admit, I feel a certain amount of frustration sometimes at just the blatant hypocrisy and the double standards that sometimes come through. But my goal here is ultimately to encourage you to think for yourself, to question everything, and that includes questioning what I'm sharing with you. But I'm going to give you some really solid examples today of how that bias comes to us, not always in the form of a big, bold lie, but more often it comes in the form of little subtle nudges to your psyche or otherwise ways to influence you and to get you to believe or lead you to conclusions that maybe you wouldn't arrive at if you had enough information or had enough facts from which to make that kind of a decision. So to set the stage for this, we're going to dub this the Yes, You Can Handle the Truth show. But first, I want to introduce you to the Because We Said So report.
Good evening and welcome to the Because We Said So report. Here's what we want you to think. The sky is falling. Please remain in a fetal position until further notice. And remember, you can rely on us here at the Because We Said So report to continue to support your cognitive dissonance, learned helplessness, confirmation bias, and appeal to authority during these unprecedented times. And now it's time to go over the carefully selected stories that have been chosen to manipulate your emotions, thoughts, and decisions. A new study shows that we can get you to believe anything as long as we begin by saying, a new study. A recent report by top experts concludes that we can get you to do anything as long as we say it's for your safety. We interrupt our regularly scheduled repeating of false stories to bring you the following special report. Something irrelevant to your life just happened, and now I'm going to blow it out of proportion for days to keep you distracted from what's really going on. The long-awaited miracle device scientists at Tech are enthusiastically calling the Hobbler has just been approved by the Center for All That Is Good for immediate public use. This cutting-edge technology will free us, for our safety, from the burden of thinking for ourselves or doing anything at all. The party can then utilize us as they see fit. Across the globe, there are massive lines eager to be fitted with this new miracle device, which will soon eliminate the need for exercise, critical thinking, or scientifically debunked nuisances such as love or empathy. Tech, making life easier. In other news, the party has rightly begun a mass operation transporting those who fail to trust this untested, settled science to internment camps for your safety. And remember, until the Hobbler is fully implemented worldwide, you can count on us at the Because We Said So report to always be here to tell you what to think, what to do, and most importantly, who to hate.
Oh boy, like all good satire, this one rests upon having an element of truth, and there is a lot of truth in that satirical take on the Because We Said So report. And I want you to pay attention as I share these next couple of stories with you to where there's appeals to authority and there's sensationalization and playing upon fears without ever actually coming out and spelling out for you, what exactly does this mean? A lot of times you are left to your own emotional association simply because there are buzzwords that are used to excite you or to frighten you or otherwise stampede you in a direction of, whoever the presenter is in their choosing. So we'll start with this headline. Nuremberg-style investigations in Idaho versus school facilities. This is from the Lewiston Tribune, and this was actually picked up on Yahoo News. But when you see Nuremberg style in quotation marks, that's supposed to, of course, convey something. First of all, not many people know what happened at Nuremberg. Some people do. Some people remember, isn't that, that's where war criminals were held accountable for the incredible crimes against humanity that they did. Now, I'm not trying to be sensational when I point this out, but do you realize in addition to death camp commandants, in addition to military officers, in addition to the soldiers who were just following orders, there were also media and journalists who supported the Third Reich, nurses and doctors who experimented on living patients against their will and against all of the better ethics of medicine. They were tried at Nuremberg, and many of those who were found guilty were in fact hanged for their crimes. So immediately you want to know that the media wants to look at this and say, well, wait, why would we have Nuremberg-style investigations in Idaho? And the answer comes, well, let's turn to the story. Whatever else one thinks about Idaho's 6th legislative district Senate contest, voters are certainly being offered a distinct choice. The Republican in the race, former Senator Dan Foreman of Viola, said one of his top priorities will be to launch a Nuremberg-style investigation into how the state handled the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, he said, I believe Idahoans needlessly died and suffered and lost their life savings because of the way the pandemic was handled. People need to know what happened so we can make sure that it never happens again. I understand. That's a painful thing for anybody to consider. Wait a minute, are you saying that public health officials or perhaps even doctors or politicians, governors perhaps, overstepped their bounds, that they caused harm, that they actually impacted people's lives by denying them their natural rights? And as hard as that may be to even contemplate, the answer is yes. It's truth. And it's a painful truth, but it's one that needs to be examined. And I know that for me personally, it's like, I was really upset about a lot of this stuff just because it was clear that it was wrong. It was clear that, when a politician claims authority to do something that they are not, they don't actually have explicit authority to do, the word that we use is they usurped. That was the word the founders used. And it's very descriptive of someone assuming power that's really not theirs to exercise. That's exactly what we saw happen. And it really did impact people's lives. I know that right now the whitewashing is going on, and the media, of course, is playing the role of, they never really did anything. And you're going to see, we'll actually see, especially in Idaho Governor Brad Little's own words, how he tries to deny that we didn't lock anything down. Really, there was nothing going on here. Nobody was hurt. But that was a big lie. People were arrested. Livelihoods were destroyed, businesses shut down, people declared non-essential. And it was because people in positions of authority took that power and ran with it. Now, I know what the excuses are. I've talked to enough people, I've debated enough people, I've heard enough people express, but Brian, there was a pandemic going on. We were afraid. I get that. We were all afraid. But why would we throw out hundreds of years of medical knowledge in how you deal with a plague or a pandemic to try something like, well, let's just shut society down and take away everybody's rights, including their right to freely travel, including their right to engage in commerce, including their right to so much as be with family members? That was new. And when officials say, well, we had no choice, that's a lie. They saw no choice. They chose to take this path. And when you hear the reasons why they chose, and in Brad Little's case, it was because there was about $19 billion in federal assistance if he would toe the line. He's not the only one who did this. But let's get on and let's look at, so we have a choice now, okay? The choice is between Senator Dan Foreman, or former Senator Dan Foreman, who's running for this Idaho 6th legislative district. Now look at this article, how it talks about his Democratic opponent in the race. Two-term incumbent Senator David Nelson of Moscow would rather focus on things like lowering property taxes, helping school districts replace aging infrastructure, and providing more funding for mental health services. Hey, those are all laudable things, but you know what they also are? They're goodies from government. And none of them in any way suggest that there will ever be any accountability for the people who so grievously took authority unto themselves and used it to destroy people's lives. And by the way, it didn't just stop with the lockdowns. The lockdowns were part of it. And the fact that people were being arrested for things like going to their church or singing in the parking lot or taking their kids to the park, that was bad enough. But then along came the vaccine and the mandates and the push to, well, we've got to make people take this vaccine, whether they want to or not. We will increase the pressure and basically segregate them from society because they're not doing what we know is best. Look, when it comes to this is something else that came out of Nuremberg. You cannot force medical treatment on someone against their will. without their consent. Informed consent is a real thing, and it was denied to people, or it was as close to denying it as possible by leveraging their employment, by leveraging their family relationships. Yeah, this is bad stuff, and it will happen again. In fact, worse will happen because those in authority saw how quickly people fell into line. Now, we've had some time to look back on this. We've had some time to see the things that they promised us. Well, the masking, it works. The vaccine, it works. Not like it was promised. Absolutely, it doesn't. And I'm not saying this from the standpoint of, well, if you're not an anti-vaxxer, then you ain't crap. But what I'm saying is we had a chance to see if what they told us was truth. And it turns out it wasn't. The places that masked down and locked down hard fared no different than places that didn't. And there's a reason for this. The reason is viruses behave in a certain way. They find their way through society. They find their way through a population until they become endemic, and enough people have had the virus and been exposed to it to start building up herd immunity. So the way that previous pandemics were handled was with you essentially you look at the most vulnerable. That would be people who are aged, people who have pre-existing health conditions, diabetes, heart disease, people who are on chemotherapy. You do your best to protect them, but everyone else can choose for themselves how much risk they are willing to accept. And that's essentially what happened. Now, places that say, well, but we locked down or we masked up and we made sure that everybody toed the line. No, they didn't. And you notice the pandemic ended. Ended. I'll put that in quotation marks. More when there was a chance that voters were fed up with it and going to rebel. That's when politicians saw the light and went, oh, well, yeah, we have to do something here. But the damage has been done. And we're still trying to quantify. I think it will actually probably take a generation or two before we can fully quantify the kind of mental health damage that was done to students that were locked out of their schools, as well as the economic damage that was done to people who simply were trying to make a living, not to mention the suffering of people who were isolated, suicidal, abusing, drugs and so forth, or just simply locked away from their families or prevented from being with their families at a time when they needed to be with them. Does that not strike you as something that should be addressed rather than repeated? Or should we instead focus on what goodies can we get from the government? So there is a choice between these candidates. And it may not be the popular thing, and certainly the people in power don't want someone who is going to insist on accountability. So I guess this would explain why, they're lining up against Dan Foreman. Now, listen to how his opponent describes him. I think there's a huge contrast between Dan Foreman and myself. He is an extremist. Well, we've been told, haven't we? Who has his views, and if you don't agree with him, he won't listen to you. I'm a proven commodity who listens and works collaboratively. If you want someone who can get something done in the legislature, vote for me. Okay, so I'm just going to ask you this, and you don't have to agree with me, but why does government exist? Does it exist to get things done? In other words, to use the power of the state to make magical things happen in your life and the sun shine every day and little birds land on your windowsill to sing you awake each morning? Is that what it exists for? You know the answer. Of course not. Government exists, at least legitimate government exists, to protect your God-given rights, to keep you free, not to solve every little problem in your life, not to impose solutions, against your consent or against your will, but to keep you free and to prevent other people from aggressing against you and denying your exercise of your natural rights. So yeah, you got a politician here who's, well, he's an extremist. He won't even listen to me. Hey, there are some places where you can compromise. And I'm sure that if they were to talk about where do we go for lunch, well, there's room for compromise there. You like Chinese, I like Mexican, but we can't seem to agree. Okay, we go for Italian or something like that. When it comes to your natural rights, there is no compromise possible. That's one of the places where if you're going to be stubborn, that's a good place. You should probably hold the line. All right, back to the article. Inflammatory remarks were something of a specialty of Foreman's during his one term in the legislature. You look at what they consider inflammatory. For example, he twice voted against the University of Idaho's annual budget, saying it contained too much pork. I'm sorry that I had to say those words out loud, and my apologies. Who's that going to offend? Maybe the Jewish or Islamic communities? But even they would realize it's an expression of too much political pork in a budget. He also referred to Moscow, the largest community in his district, as a cesspool of liberalism. Well, that's an opinion. And you know what? I bet you he could probably point to something that would back that up, given that it is a university community and that, let's just say, leftist thinking, liberalism is likely to be found there in abundance. Could he have said it better? Certainly. But that's hardly, inflammatory remarks, especially when you consider, calling him an extremist. Oh, he's unreasonable. How could you possibly do this? Saying the legislature needs to conduct a Nuremberg-style investigation is similarly inflammatory, given that it refers to the Nazi war crimes trials held after World War II. Well, I'll give you this. It's disturbing to hear someone invoke that type of trial, but you know what's even more disturbing? The fact that people were committing crimes against humanity that would require that kind of accountability. I don't think he's wrong. I think these people need to be held accountable. And here's what I'm saying. I'm not saying, well, you want to see them all hanged? I think the first and best thing is those who abuse power need to be separated from that power. It should be taken from them, and they should never be allowed to hold it again. That's reasonable. Now, in some cases, Dr. Fauci, I'm kind of thinking of you, where there was extremely callous disregard for what happened to people, especially where people profited very handsomely. I don't know if you saw, a story just came out this last week about how many people within the national legislature, we're talking politicians at the highest levels of our federal government, sold their stocks knowing that the lockdowns were coming. They had inside information and they profited very well. They did quite well because they knew what was coming. Does that strike you as just slightly amoral or maybe a little bit unethical? Okay, something to think about. Now, Foreman, on the other hand, I want you to hear what he's saying here. He is unapologetic for using such terms. He says you can't sugarcoat the truth so it will be palatable to your listeners, because then it's not the truth. My constituents gave me that term. Individual rights were violated during the pandemic in the name of taking federal money. So if saying that cost me votes, he says, then so be it. I'm not a politician. I am a Christian, conservative Republican. Watering down issues this serious is tantamount to lying. And speaking of lying, can I give you a really good example of what that looks like? This is Idaho Governor Brad Little trying to convince us that he never suggested that we lock down the state or otherwise negatively impact people's natural rights. Unfortunately for him, the internet has a long memory.
Every day, the governor makes decisions that affect all our lives.
Today, I will be issuing a statewide stay-home order for all of Idaho.
Here is the myth. The emergency declaration somehow shuts down Idaho or takes away your rights.
Restaurants across the state are being ordered to close. People must limit all non-essential gatherings of any number of individuals outside the household.
Governor Brad Little is extending his stay-at-home order for the state of Idaho.
Law enforcement has the ability to cite individuals for violating local ordinances.
3 Christians were arrested and 5 were cited by police for not wearing masks or social distancing at a hymn singing event in Moscow, Idaho's City Hall parking lot Wednesday night.
We asked Idaho's governor what his message was for those people thinking of intentionally disobeying the order.
And I just think it's a little disrespectful to the people that are making a sacrifice and doing the right thing.
Sarah Brady, a 40-year-old resident of Meridian, after they say she refused several times to leave the playground.
But law enforcement cannot be everywhere all the time.
I was the only person that was arrested.
The incident happened at a park in Meridian, Idaho, where anti-lockdown parents reportedly sent out this plea on social media. There are a bunch of us taking our kids to the park.
We followed the science. We followed the CDC guidelines, and that's why we did it. We're just following the science.
Governor Little making the announcement today to extend the statewide stay-at-home order.
Idaho will need to remain under a stage 2 statewide public health order. The order requires strict limits on gathering sizes.
Idaho Governor Brad Little issued a stay-at-home order for all of Idaho that requires everyone in the state to self-isolate at home.
I issued a statewide stay-home order. That means we all must limit social gatherings and practice physical distancing and wearing masks. The time to get the vaccine shot is now. If everyone wore a mask, 80% of the spread of the coronavirus would go away. It's an epidemiological fact.
No, it's not. And you're caught lying. Sorry, Governor, but you've been caught. Now, when he talks about we're just following the CDC guidelines, look at this interesting circular logic that allows plausible deniability to, for instance, now the CDC has just this last week voted to add the COVID-19 vaccine to the required vaccines that school children across the country will have to receive if they wish to attend public school. And I mean, absent this, in some states you can get waivers, in some states you can't. But here's what's going to happen. The CDC is going to say, well, now don't blame us. We just make recommendations. Each school can make their own decisions, take it up with them. To which the schools will say, don't blame us. We're just following the CDC's recommendation. Take it up with them. Oh, we're just passing. We're doing back and forth. And as far as the governor's claim of, well, we're just following the science, come on, here's what we're doing. Okay, a little illustration of what happens. We have the speed of sound. We have the speed of light. What is it that's the speed of science? Oh, that's it, money. What was that? $15 billion, Governor. I think that that was the price for which you were willing to sell your soul in a buyer's market. Don't believe politicians when they lie to you and gaslight you and tell you that never happened. I never did anything like that. You're going to be hearing a lot more of it because right now we are seeing more and more of the consequences of adverse effects to the vaccines and so forth that are starting to come forward. There's going to come a point where people are going to realize they've been hoodwinked. And I promise, I'm not going to sit there and say, I told you so, but there have been a lot of voices that have been warning about this for a long time. They probably earned the right to say, I told you so, but instead I will embrace you for finally acknowledging, okay, I know you didn't want to believe it, but it was true. And welcome to the painful truth. But nobody is going to have the option of saying, but nobody warned us. Nobody said anything. I'm making sure I'm doing my part to make sure that nobody has the luxury of saying that. All right, I'm going to shift gears in this last couple of minutes. I want to talk about the Attorney General's race. Oh, my word. Somebody is terrified. We talked earlier about how in the Attorney General's race, Raul Labrador, who is the Republican nominee, is facing Tom Arkush. And Arkush had 50, count them, 50 former politicians, political bigwigs from the old guard, who all lined up to say he's the better choice. Thus saith the old guard, thus saith the political insiders. And now, thanks to Betsy Russell, here's a headline from IdahoPress.com. Former top law enforcement officials come out against Labrador, endorse Arkush for Attorney General. There's 5 of them, to be exact, that showed up for this press conference. Wait till you hear some of the reasons why they are choosing to endorse Arkush and why they're trying to throw Labrador under the bus. An array of former top Idaho law enforcement officers and officials endorsed Tom Arkush for Idaho Attorney General today, citing concerns over rival Raul Labrador's law enforcement positions. Those included pushing legislation in Congress in 2017 that Idaho sheriffs opposed to stop local law enforcement agencies from receiving free transfers of surplus military equipment, and both writing to and talking to the U.S. Attorney General in 2017 to seek favorable treatment of Ammon Bundy and militia members involved in a 2014 standoff with the authorities at Bundy Ranch. Okay, couple things here that have to be considered. First and foremost, the 1033 program does in fact transfer military equipment, and wait till you see the excuse that some of these former law enforcement officials, and I mean, we're talking again, this is the old guard. These are the very highly politicized people who've been in the job for a long time and have learned to play the game. They are politicians more so than law enforcement officers. But they say, oh, well, that was really no big deal. It was just for sleeping bags and maybe a helmet or something like that. No, it's not. It's offensive vehicles, like armored vehicles, all in the name of safety. But again, this is not safety for the public so much as it's safety for the state. So here's one of them. I believe this was former Ada County Sheriff Gary Rainey, who'd come out as a member of Republicans for Arkush. He said Labrador, when advancing his unsuccessful 2017 legislation, just blew off the concerns of sheriffs about ending a program that he said provided basic surplus equipment to cash-strapped rural agencies. Rainey said there was sensationalism about giving cops things like rocket launchers. It was simple things like sleeping bags and Kevlar helmets. That is not entirely true, and I'm kind of disappointed that a former lawman would lie like this. It included weapons, it included vehicles, it included, night vision. Basically, it was getting the police more and more like soldiers or warriors like this. Does this look like somebody who just walked off the streets of Fallujah following the siege, back in the early 2000s? Or is this a sheriff's deputy looking for apparently some suspects who had fled from police into a Kimberly cornfield? Yeah, this is the point. It's not something so simple. Oh, look, they're on the left. That is the Preston, Idaho police chief. Yes, Napoleon Dynamite's Preston, Idaho. Pedro offers you his protection with an MRAP? Well, I guess we better take it if we know what's good for us. The one on the right, that's for the Lewiston Police Department. Now, this is not to suggest that police couldn't use these things at some point in the name of public safety. I can think of a couple of incidents where they've had, someone who was pinning down officers with a rifle, and they needed to go in and rescue them. But something here doesn't ring true. And I'm not sure exactly what we're supposed to believe when the sheriff is saying, well, this AG candidate, he didn't want our police being more militarized. They blew it off as if it was no big deal. But there's a huge difference between a warrior cop and a peace officer. A peace officer's job is keeping the peace, not, ruthlessly ruling the hood like it was downtown Fallujah. So back to the article. The campaign advisor for the Labrador campaign, Brent Littlefield, said in an emailed statement, Democrat Arkush's entire campaign is about false and misleading attacks from former politicians and former officials. And I like how he puts this. Raul Labrador is not focused on the past. He is focused on Idaho's future. And he added, while Democrat Arkush has former officials and has-been politicians surrounding his campaign, Raul Labrador has the support of current Idaho law enforcement leaders, including Ada County Sheriff Matt Clifford, Canyon County Sheriff Kieran Donahue, Kootenai County Sheriff Bob Norris, Twin Falls County Sheriff Tom Carter, Clearwater County Sheriff Chris Getz, Fremont County Sheriff Len Humphreys, and Oneida County Sheriff Arnie Jones, just to name a few. Raul Labrador looks forward to working with these current law enforcement leaders as Idaho's next Attorney General. Now, former Sheriff Rainey said, experience as a county prosecutor is essential to understanding the needs of officers in the field, encouraging best practices, and keeping the public safe. Tom Arkush has demonstrated that law enforcement will have a steadfast partner in the AG's office. Do you understand what that's saying? Our group has serious concerns, however, about his opponent, Mr. Labrador, who has said he will be a true partner to the conservatives in the legislature, many of whom are friendly with militias. There's the scary part. This is who you're supposed to hate. This poses risks to public safety. Now, they brought up the Bundy incident earlier, and this is the part that gets me. When a congressman reaches out to work with the U.S. attorney or to try to help sort things out, maybe this just forgotten. They forgot to tell you that. Do you know how that Bundy trial ended up? Do you understand that the Bundys, yes, there was a standoff that actually took place in Bunkerville. I was down there. Okay, so I can speak from some firsthand experience here of what was going on there. But do you realize the reason why that case was dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be brought back and the Bundys could not be tried on those charges, is because the federal prosecutors behaved so egregiously and so badly conducted themselves that it was a terrible miscarriage of justice. It was an injustice. And having another trial wouldn't begin to satisfy the demands of justice. Now, sadly, I don't think there was any real accountability on the part of those federal prosecutors, FBI agents, and rogue BLM agents that set those things in motion. But the bottom line is they came to steal a family's property, their cattle. And they were thwarted in that attempt when citizens, that would be the militia, showed up to defend those family members. Now, you may not like it. And I'll confess, I was not real happy about the way things were going down at the time. I thought, oh, this is going to end so badly. But the bottom line is the federal government was wrong. And so when we have this quote about, well, this Arkush is going to stand on the side of the police, always. Well, great, he's going to stand on the side of the state. Who elects the attorney general? Tell me that. Is it law enforcement or is it the people of the state of Idaho? Who is the attorney general supposed to represent as an elected official? Just law enforcement or the people of Idaho? I think I'd be a lot more comfortable with an attorney general who is more dedicated to protecting the people from the predations of the state than simply rubber stamping or justifying whatever the state wants to do, including, becoming more militarized, in its efforts to achieve total control. It's just my opinion. And if it offends you, I can't help you there. By the way, for those who say, well, that sounds really scary, that sounds like it could be hateful. Well, my only response is truth sounds like hate to those who hate truth. So don't look for me to change my tune anytime soon either. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.